Over to you, doctor.
Thank you and welcome all of you to this session on tips and tricks in cataract surgery. Although cataract surgery is the most commonly performed technique, there's still something which we can take off from every talk and every session we attend. And this session is meant to just share some of these tips from expert faculty. So we have amongst us today a very accomplished, experienced group of surgeons who will be sharing some nuances of the RC procedure. So first, I'd like to invite Dr. Anant V. Jain, who is a fabulous surgeon from Ghaziabad, and he will be talking to us on hard cataracts. Over to you, Anant.
Thank you, ma'am. Is my screen visible, ma'am? Hello? Is my screen visible?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, Anant.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Dr. Haripriya ma'am and AIOS for giving me opportunity to speak in this symposium. Now, as we all know, in cataract surgery or phacoemulsification, the most challenging part is rhexis, and apart from rhexis, the second most challenging part is to divide the nucleus into two halves. So I will be speaking on a technique where I will show how to divide a nucleus into two halves easily. So drill and chop technique for hard cataract. Is my presentation moving slide?
No, Anant, it is not. You
Yes,
want to
ma'am,
just
I have to just
do it again? Yes.
do it again, ma'am. Is it visible now, ma'am? No.
Not yet. You can first open the PowerPoint and then, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you can try again, Anant.
Yeah, ma'am. Now it is moving.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for the glitches. Drill and chop is an easy, safe, and effective chopping technique for initial chop in hard cataract. Now the steps, what we do is here we will drill a 2 mm deep hole at subinitial area near the rhexis margin, as shown is in the first photograph. Here at subinitial margin, I am drilling a 2 mm deep hole with high power. Now the nucleus is rotated 180 degree and phaco tip is deeply buried in the nucleus at subinitial area near the rhexis margin, as I have done here. At high power, I have buried the phaco tip at the subinitial area. Again, it is moving.
No, Anand, it is not moving.
Ma'am, I don't know what is happening. I will just try again.
Try once more, yeah.
It is visible now, ma'am?
It is, but just try moving forward. We'll see if it's before you start talking.
Is it moving now, ma'am?
Yes, just move one more slide. Yes, it is moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the other step is now we place a long chopper in the already drilled hole opposite to the buried phaco tip, as we can see here in this picture. Now, chop is initiated by bringing the chopper and the phaco tip towards each other. As they come closer, they are literally separated and chop is completed by obtaining the two halves. As we see here, I have put the long chopper in the already drilled hole, and now I am bringing them closer. As they come closer, we separate them horizontally and the chop is completed. And the advantage of placing the chopper in already drilled hole is that we are burying the chopper deep in the core of the nucleus, endonucleus. So it is easier to split the nucleus. And in this technique, we are entrapping the nucleus between two opposite place instruments, as you can see in the diagram. So a much greater mechanical force can be used instead of 500, 600, which we can generate a vacuum force, which we can generate with the help of the phaco tip, and can be applied on the densest of the nucleus to split it very easily. So this is the technique which is there. So we can easily divide the nucleus into two parts. Most of the nucleus can be divided with this technique. Now, so a few videos I will show. Now, this is a leathery hard catret. After the initial steps, these are fast forward. Now, what I will do is I will drill a sub-initial hole as shown here, a 2 mm deep. Now we'll rotate the nucleus and place the and now bury the phaco tip at the sub-initial area with very high vacuum, as in shown here. Then we place a long chopper in the already drilled hole, and we'll move the instrument towards each other, phaco tip as well as the chopper. As they come closer, we will just literally separate them and the nucleus is split into two parts. So it is a very easy technique and can be done by any surgeon. And other advantage is that the initial step of placing a chopper or burying a chopper after impaling the nucleus with the phaco tip is difficult for the beginners as well as sometimes for us also. If there is nucleus very leathery, we are not able to go deep, or if the capsule is lax or there is a subluxation or weak zone use. So this is an easier technique, and rest of the surgery can be completed with the preferred technique of a surgeon. The other way, this is a modified sort of a horizontal chop. The horizontal chop, either you have to place the chopper in the bag, which is a very difficult. Sometimes you can get zonular dialysis, or sometimes bag is not visible easily. So this is the other case. Here also, this is a leathery catret. Here the posterior plate, posterior fibers are very leathery. So I was not able to split the nucleus into two halves in the one go. So what you do is, we do lateral separation of the posterior leathery fibers to split the nucleus into two halves. So impaling the nucleus with a very high vacuum. Now I'm bringing closer the two instruments, and now I'm laterally separating, but I was not able to split the nucleus properly. So what I am doing is I will do lateral separation to deeper so I can split the fibers. And here I am splitting the fibers and divided the nucleus in two halves. Now the rest of the surgery is simple, like what preferred technique of any surgeon, whatever he wants, he can do it. I do direct chop in these cases. So I'm separating the nucleus, dividing nucleus into two halves or smaller pieces and just simplifying it. Other way of doing this technique is that you have to prolapse the one pole of the nucleus out of the bag and place the chopper behind the nucleus and then initiate the chop. But that is also difficult to bring out the nucleus. So these are this helps us in easy way of doing a horizontal chop with greater mechanical force, which no other technique can provide us. Now this is a small case pupil, rigid pupil. So I am enlarging the pupil with the help of BF string, a pupil expander. And now here also same technique I am utilizing. After making a 2 mm deep hole, I am rotating the nucleus. Now I'll bury a long chopper. Chopper should be around 1.5 to 2 mm long. Burying it in the already drilled hole and bringing them together. As they come closer, I will literally separate them, and we are able to get the two halves of the nucleus, and rest of the surgery is very simple. Now, this is the another case. This is a case of a hypermature catret where we don't have a cortical support. So advantage of in these cases is that you have a hold over the nucleus. Other cases, if you are trying to do a direct chop, then sometimes nucleus get tilts if our vacuum seal is broken or if there is not adequate vacuum. So in those cases, there are chances of zonal dialysis in lax capsule or weaker capsules. So here that doesn't happen. And advantage is that the nucleus doesn't tilt because it is compressed between the two instruments. And we are doing a sort of a mechanical chop. As you see here, we can easily able to split the nucleus in two halves without any pressure over the bag. As you see here, I'm bringing the two instruments together and I'm separating them. There is no pressure over the bag and there is no tilt of the nucleus. So in the weaker bags also, the bag remains intact. So to conclude, I would say that drill and chop is an effective, easy and safe technique for chopping a hard nucleus into two halves. In hard cutter, it is always challenging to bury the chopper in the nucleus to initiate chopping. By drilling a hole in the nucleus, it is very easy to place the chopper deep in the nucleus to initiate a complete crack. Thus, this innovative technique can be easily learned and mastered by any ophthalmic surgeon, even by the beginners effectively. I thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you, Anand. So now you know why I said that he's a fabulous surgeon. You make it look so easy.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, very, very nice tip. So I'm going to try it too. But any questions amongst the panelists? Do you have any questions for Dr. Anand?
Yeah, Dr. Haripriya, I just wanted to ask Dr. Anand a question. Any special modification of the chopper that you used? What are the tips?
You can use any chopper, any long chopper can be used.
No, should have a bulbous tip or something to accommodate?
No, nothing like that. In the last cases, I have used a simple long Sinskey hook, which is around 1.7 mm. And earlier cases, this was a Chang chopper, which I have used.
Probably a thicker chopper with a cutting edge inside would probably be better when we actually oppose it.
See, yes, it can be better, but we are using a lot of mechanical forces. Mechanical force cutting sharp, it is not required. Yes, it will be a bit beneficial, but not as such. You can use any chopper. Any long chopper.
Leathery cataract. Sometimes even when we do a direct chop, they don't normally cut. We have to actually make a trench to make the separation better.
Earlier in the previous videos, what I had showed you in the leathery cataract also, you are able to get a very deep split. Sometimes there are some fibers are left, so you have to do lateral separation as we usually do in leathery cataract to split out the separate the leathery fibers. But 90% of the cases, hard cataract, we are easily able to get. In fact, from grade 2 to 4, 5 grade, easily it can be done without any harm or any difficulty.
A fabulous technique. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Very nice.
So I also think that because one of the challenges is for us to go deep enough in these leathery cataracts, both the phaco tip and the chopper. So he's taking care of that part from the chopper point of view by making that little drill there. So once he's making that drill, he's going much deeper, and that helps to also separate the leathery fibers.
Yes, ma'am. We are going very near to the densest part of the cataract with this.
Which kinds of makes you don't have to put so much of mechanical force like you would have to if you don't do that drill. So that makes it easier.
Second more thing which I would like to say is, see, in the chopping, if you're doing direct chopping, what you are doing, you are holding the nucleus with the phaco probe. So phaco probe, you can get maximum 600 vacuum or higher end machine, 650 vacuum. Sometimes it is not adequate to bury the chopper. Sometimes there is a tilt or something. All these things are eliminated in this. So any beginner can also do. Some of my fellows are also easily able to do these things. No issues with that.
Thank you, Anand.
Thank you.
So I will go on to the next talk by Dr. Madhushekar. Madhushekar heads the cataract and IOL services at Aravind Eye Hospital, Madurai. Again, a very gifted surgeon and a wonderful teacher. Over to you, Madhu.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for giving me opportunity. Thank you, AIS and Partha Viswas sir and Haripriya madam for giving me opportunity. So I will share my screen. My screen is visible, madam.
I can see the folder. You may have to open your PowerPoint first and then start sharing, I think.
Now it is visible, madam?
Yes, Madhu,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Yes. So my talk is on early identification and management of subluxated cataract. It is not moving. Yes. Now it is moving, madam. My slide is
yes.
So subluxation of lens makes every step of cataract surgery difficult. So it requires early recognition of threatening sign and meticulous management of same for better outcome. So early recognition minimizes further worsening of complication, reduces surgical duration, early rehabilitation, and good visual recovery. So preoperative workup is very important to identify it in a very early stage, preoperative stage. So detailed history and meticulous slit lamp examination and slit lamp findings like variable anterior chamber depth, vitreous in anterior chamber, iridophrecodinosis, or visibility of liquator of lens in eccentric gaze should be uh, captured in preoperative workup. So problems arises if subtle sign of subluxation are missed out in pre-op workup, or when you are working in a high volume setup where you have not seen the case pre-operatively, or there is intraoperative dialysis. So when before entry, you should look for variable anterior chamber depth, sphincter tear, or visibility of equatorial margin after proper dilatation. You can slightly tilt with forceps and see whether any dialysis is there or not. So sometimes just after entry, if you encounter with vitreous near section, it makes your surgery more difficult. And one can expect larger dialysis than what is seen. So first we have to clear the vitreous from the section. We have to swipe it from the section. And then after that, you can tamponade the dialyzed area with dispersive viscoelastic. Then you can go for automated vitrectomy to clear the vitreous, and then you can proceed further. In a few cases, just after staining your capsule with trypan blue and injecting viscoelastic, if you observe any stain is seeping in the vitreous cavity, means it indicates that your granules are weak in that area. So you have to be careful and you have to manage accordingly. And sometimes during rhexis, when you have started rhexis with sharp cystotome and you see puckering or dimpling of capsule, it indicates that there is generalized weakness of granules in this cataract. In few cases, if you have started your rhexis and you are finding it difficult to initiate the rhexis with the sharp needle, it indicates that there is a subluxation of lens. So you just make a nick and you can use capsulorhexis forceps to complete the rhexis without exerting excess pull on the granules. So if this type of case is identified early, then you can manage it by placing capsule hooks. Care should be taken that paracentesis should be made slightly posterior to limbus so that there is no pull on the rhexis margin, and there should not be excess pull on the capsule when you are tightening the hooks. Sometimes you can use CTR preoperatively also, so that it will further stabilize your back and it will prevent further vitreous prolapse. And sometimes during phaco, that due to surge, there will be chances of rupture of capsule. So it will prevent you during that time. In few cases, when like in dense pseudoexfoliation, if you have used Aries hooks for pupil expansion, and then during rhexis you find there is gross subluxation. Then after completing rhexis, you can transfer the same hooks, Aries hooks, to the capsule to support your bag. If you are dealing with slightly harder cataract and you identified any genre dialysis in very early stage of phacoemulsification, then it is better to move to some other site and away from that your main incision, and you can convert it into a small incision cataract surgery, and you can prolapse and do your surgery safely. If you are dealing with some subluxated cataract and while cortex aspiration, you find that there is dehiscence in the journals or weakness in the bag. So instead of using a radial pull, you can use a tangential pull to pull out the cortex, so that it will prevent your further extension of journal dialysis. This type of bag can be stabilized with CTR ring after cortex was. So remember 3S, 3 A's: be alert, know what to anticipate, and act quickly for a good outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu. A lot of wonderful tips with some beautiful surgeries.
Thank you,
When would you normally like to place your CTR? If you're suspecting a patient to have subluxation, let's say of 3 clock hours, a traumatic cataract, after which step or before which step would you normally recommend a CTR placement?
Usually CTRs would be delayed as much as possible so that that cortex aspiration become easier. If there is generalized weakness, then better to place it in early stage only, so that it will stabilize your bag and it will prevent further vitreous prolapse. And sometimes with high vacuum, there is chances of suction of capsular bag from periphery and chances of rupture. So it will make your surgery more difficult. So better to, yes.
Yes, thanks, Madhu. Any other questions?
Any particular comment on the rhexis size, Dr. Madhu?
In subluxated cataract, we should usually start from the area where there is no journal dialysis, and we should make it larger in the area away from journal dialysis and smaller in the area of dialyzed area. But better to make it 4.5 to 5 millimeters, so that you can see your rhexis nicely and you can manipulate your nucleus inside the bag.
Well, there's a general opinion that the larger the rhexis, the disturbance or the traction that we create on the remaining zones will be much lesser because we have a wider opening into the capsule.
Yes,
so a larger rhexis than usual, would it actually be beneficial?
I think it's also more risky, more difficult to do a large rhexis in these cases because the chance of running out also is very high with these weeks on use. So maybe a little larger on the side where it's intact should be fine, but you may have to also place it. If it's diffuse, again, there'll be an issue of it running out. So it's a challenge. Probably if one can use some hooks, like capsule hooks on the rhexis margin as one is performing rhexis, that may also be useful to try to have a larger rhexis. Right, so thank you. So we'll go on to the next talk. Dr. Prajakta Deshpande.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Dr. Prajakta is from Thane. again, a wonderful person, and she is from Sri Ramakrishna Netharya, and a cataract and refractive surgeon with a very busy practice. Over to you, Prajakta.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'll be talking on tips and tricks for flax. I don't have any financial interest in this system, but we have been using this system since last 3 years with great results. It gives you a better access, it reduces the ultrasound energy required for phacoemulsification, and overall it enhances the results of cataract surgery. It's a very advanced system, but it always functions as a support system for regular cataract surgery. The preoperative preparation is not very different from a routine cataract procedure. As you all know that femto causes pupillary constriction due to release of prostaglandins. So we start topical NSAIDs 3 days prior to surgery. Also, the lag time between the femto procedure and actual surgery should be minimized. That is, patient should be taken for surgery as early as possible after the femto is done. This is again because if you make the patient wait for a longer time, then the pupil comes down. And we use intracameral phenylephrine to dilate the pupil. So all these steps are taken to keep the nice dilated pupil during surgery. The LENSAR system uses this patient interface, which fits in almost all the eyes, even in deep socket eyes. And sometimes you have to use a speculum to keep the eye open. Just tell the patient to look straight up and not to move during the procedure, because if the patient moves, you might get a suction loss and you'll have to abandon the procedure. This is a non-applanating liquid interface, and it causes less pressure over the cornea, and there won't be any formation of corneal folds. So you get more consistent results. During docking, you should not get any air bubble in the system. If you get such kind of a air bubble, then lift the whole thing, inject some saline and redock again, because the air bubble hampers the laser delivery system. And after docking is complete, you get the Scheimpflug imaging of the anterior segment, where you come to know about the thickness of the length, the depth of the anterior chamber, any zonular dialysis. So you just look very carefully at the Scheimpflug imaging, and you get many clues in this phase. So in this picture, you can see the obvious lenticular tilt, and this was a traumatic cataract with subluxation. And while doing femto, we can see the large lenticular tilt, and this is the same eye under the operating microscope, which shows the large zonular dialysis, for which I am putting the CTR. So looking at the Scheimpflug imaging gives you pre-entry clues, and you just look very carefully while doing the femto. The clear corneal incisions are triplanar. We use this blunt-tipped spatula to open the incisions. Just go vertically down, open the incision, then reverse the spatula, and then dissect in the plane created by the laser, and just dimple down to into the anterior chamber, and just extend the incision. So these incisions are not possible if the patient has Arcus, and in these cases, you have to enter manually with the keratome. The eyeball has to be tight, so you can open these incisions just before making a side port, or make a side port, fill the anterior chamber with visco, and then open these incisions. The location of these incisions can be changed depending on the astigmatism the patient has and depending on the surgeon's preference. Limbal relaxing incisions also can be opened with the same blunt-tipped spatula. Just go vertically down to open these incisions. The globe has to be tightly filled with visco, or just at the beginning of surgery, or in the end before taking out the visco after implantation of the lens, you can open these incisions. It is advisable to put some viscoelastic over these incisions while opening, just to prevent some epithelial damage caused by the blunt-tipped spatula. So these incisions can be single or paired depending on the astigmatism the patient has. The machine uses Woodcock's nomogram to determine the site of the incision, length of the incision, and they all are uniform incisions which are placed at a depth of 85 to 90%. So they give more consistent results compared to our manual LRIs. Capsulotomy is almost always free-floating, but if the patient moves during the femto procedure, then you might have tags. So you just go with a Rexis forceps in a visco-filled chamber, pinch in the center. Just move the capsulotomy a little bit to and fro and gently pull it out. You may find sometimes, very rarely, you may find some micro adhesions, and in those cases, you have to make the rhexis manually with the forceps. The size of the capsulotomy can be adjusted automatically depending on the pupillary size. So if the pupil is small, the machine automatically makes a smaller capsulotomy. But the distance between the rhexis margin and the capsulotomy margin is never less than 0.5 millimeters. Hydrodissection should be very gentle in these cases. Inject very little fluid under the capsule and just tap over the center. As you all know that femto works by cavitation bubble formation, and these bubbles get trapped between the nucleus and the posterior capsule. So if you don't tap over the nucleus, don't take them out, you get a capsular distension syndrome and eventual PC rent. So it is very necessary to remove these air bubbles, take them to the surface before proceeding for nucleus fragmentation. Nucleus fragmentation is easier in these cases compared to regular phacoemulsification, because you have all the chopped nucleus and softened nucleus. Just remove the superficial cortex, identify the primary meridian of the chop, embed with the phaco probe and separate with the chopper. So the phaco energy required for phacoemulsification in these cases is reduced by 35 to 40% almost. So it is useful in compromised corneas. And the machine has automated nucleus grading and fragmentation pattern selection feature. So the machine gives according to the density of the cataract, the machine selects the pattern. So this is very useful in compromised corneas. Sometimes you get a large epinuclear plate. This is because you keep an offset of around 500 to 1000 microns between the nucleus and the posterior capsule. The cortex aspiration is a little bit tricky in these cases. This is because the machine cuts the cortex along with the capsule. So in normal cataract surgery, you have wedges of the cortex. You just engage them and pull them to the center for removing. But here the cortex is completely stuck to the capsule. So you have to go under the capsule, literally peel the cortex and gently pull it to the center for aspiration. And it is advisable to use a bimanual eye. It is a bit tricky, but after doing 8 to 10 cases, you can master it. So the take-home message is you need a well-centered docking, and there shouldn't be any air bubbles in the assembly, because air bubbles cause disturbance in the laser delivery system. You need to use preoperative NSAIDs and intracameral phenylephrine for having a nice dilated pupil during the surgery. There shouldn't be any capsular tags, so just make sure that no tags are there before pulling out the capsulotomy flap. And while doing hydro procedures, you need to take out the bubbles to the surface before proceeding for nucleus fragmentation. And cortex aspiration has got a little bit of learning curve, which can be mastered after doing 8 to 10 cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Prajakta. Very comprehensive talk.
Thank you, madam.
Yeah. Did you use the LensX before using the Lens AR for some time, or was this the first Flax machine?
This is the first platform we have been using, madam. We haven't used this LensX.
I thought you did. Okay. I just wanted to know, are there any situations you would not like to use the Lens AR?
Yes. If the patient has difficulty in lying down, if the patient is having head movement, or if there is a large bleb where you cannot literally place the suction ring, or you might get repeated suction loss because of loose conjunctiva, or if the pupil is very small, because in such cases you get a very small capsulotomy and then it is difficult to do the rest of the surgery. So in those cases, I think we should not be doing Flax.
Any complications which you have seen? I mean, I know there will be far and few, but anything we have to be wary of? Anything you'd like to warn us of?
No, madam.
Which you don't see with conventional phaco. Anything? I mean,
no, madam. Just the cortex aspiration is slightly difficult. Otherwise, everything else is very easy actually compared to normal cataract surgery.
Madam, I would like to add one point. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Madam, sometimes what happens in hypermature cataract, whenever there is a lot of pressure in the capsule, sometimes when we are doing the rhexis, sometimes it bursts. One of my cases, what happened was it burst out and the capsule got capsule got the capsule flattened over the nucleus. So the pattern which I was making came over the capsule also. So you have to take care of that also. Sometime it happens
Oh, okay.
because I have a catalyst and it has the fastest rexes in all the machines which are there. Then also it can happen. So the capsule goes down and stuck and flattens over the nucleus. So the pattern of the grid which you are doing comes over the capsule. So then you don't have any other option. You have to convert into SICS because the capsule is cut from many places.
Yes, yes, I think that is true. I think mature cataracts with some calcified capsule, hypermature lenses, you have to be more careful. Sometimes it works. Sometimes if the capsule is calcified, you may have tags.
Yes.
Or like Anand said, hypermature again, if the leakage of fluid may prevent it to be cut completely. So one has to be aware of those things when using it for those cataracts. Any other questions?
I think what I was quite impressed was the way that the docking happened in Lenser. I think compared to Lensex, I think you also must be using it. Probably in a very deep set globe, or in case of very small anterior segment, or very patient who is not able to open the eyes completely, I think we have a little trouble docking despite using a speculum. I think this was a lot better. I think I thought it to be much probably easier than Lensex. What do you say, Dr. Haripriya? What is your comment on that?
I'm not using Lensex today, but the video which you showed, I would agree. With the Lens AR, it did seem fairly easy compared to the Lens.
And now, madam, they are coming up with new elliptical PIs, which very easily will fit in the deep socket eyes also. And with this PI also, we never had problem in fitting in deep socket eyes actually.
Okay, that's good. I think it's constantly evolving. I mean, compared to what it was when it started off, things are much better. The quality of
yes,
the interface, everything is much better today. So, thank you, Prajakta.
Thank you, ma'am.
Speaker is Dr. Ashok Vardhan. Dr. Ashok heads the Aravind Eye Hospital at Tirupati, and again an excellent anterior segment cataract and glaucoma surgeon. Over to you, Ashok.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you, Madam and AOS, for this opportunity to present this forum. So I would be discussing my ways of handling a white cataract in a safe manner. There is no financial interest to disclose. So as you all know, all white cataracts are not the same. So every white cataract is different. It ranges from a soft intumescent lens, and it may range up to a hypermature cataract with a shrunken anterior lens capsule, and later it may become a Morgagnian cataract also. So it may be associated with other features like pseudo exfoliation and a small pupil also. So the difficulty of doing a cataract or phaco surgery in white cataract is one is there is a shallow anterior chamfer due to intumescent lens. And usually this cataract happens in very old people, and it has associated zonular weakness, and there is increased lenticular pressure, so which makes the capsulorhexis more challenging. And there is a poor red glow, and there is no epinuclear cushion, which helps in doing a phaco in a much safer way. So how do you decide of the two techniques? Either you do phaco or SICS. I feel every surgeon has their own self-awareness, what they're capable of, and the decision factors which needs to be considered is, one is important thing is the age of the patient. So a patient may be more than 75, 80 years. I would prefer doing an SICS because the risk for complication and handling the complication in such a old patient with so much other comorbidities will be quite drastic, quite difficult for the patient. And the type of white cataract, if it's a soft intumescent cataract, it's quite easy to do than a hard mature cataract with a very hard nucleus, and or a phacolytic glaucoma case, so in which there is so much of milky fluid, cortical fluid, which makes the chops much more difficult. The anterior chamber, if it's very shallow, it's very difficult. It's quite difficult to do a phaco rhexis and a phaco also. And associated features like a pseudo exfoliation and a zonal weakness in old patients makes the surgery more complicated. And another thing is we have to know the patient expectation. Whether if it's an young patient, then you take the risk of doing a phaco. Definitely, you have to do the best that can be done for the patient. And it's always better you check the other eye status. If the other eye has a posterior polar cataract, it's better because you don't know what is there under the mature cataract. So you can choose small incision cataract surgery over phaco in those cases. So how do you prepare for the surgery? I think preparing the patient is also important, and preparing the eye for the surgery is also quite important. So we need to examine the status of white cataract and other comorbidities in the eye, like a pseudo exfoliation, glaucoma, what is the corneal status, and if there is any squint for the patient of a long-standing mature cataract, they may have a diplopia post-surgery. And we need to get a guarded visual prognosis consent from all these patients, because we don't know how what will be the visual outcomes because of post-op. We will know the retinal status completely only after surgery. And we need to counsel about the conversion of phaco to SICS. If at all the phaco doesn't go along well, then we have to move to SICS technique also. And it's better you choose a hydrophobic acrylic IOL, so that you would have the option of using a 3-piece or a single-piece acrylic IOL. And it's better you give some hyperosmotic agent so that the vitreous contracts and you have a better space to do the surgery in the anterior chamber. One of the crucial steps, as you all know, is getting a good complete capsulorhexis in mature cataract. And so definitely you have to use a trypan blue in all mature cataracts because there is no red glow. And it's better you use a soft shell technique so that the rhexis comes out well. And the initial nick which you make with the cystitome needs to be quick and a curved one, so that it has less chance of getting extended to the equator. And you can reduce the intralenticular pressure by draining the cortical fluid and then continue doing the capsulorhexis. And forceps definitely has a better control of the flap in mature cataracts because there is no counter pressure from the cortex. So forceps has a better control to bring back the rhexis as per your wish. And it's better you aim for a smaller rhexis than for a larger rhexis, because high chance of getting extended to the periphery. So aim for a smaller rhexis, later you can enlarge it. So this is just a soft shell technique in which you use the dispersive viscoelastic to coat the endothelium. And then you use a cohesive viscoelastic to deepen the anterior chamber. Sorry, I had some. So on the initial nick, as I said, it needs to be quick and then curved so that it doesn't extend into the periphery. So it's better you do a cystitome when you start the rhexis. And as you know, there's very high chance that the rhexis gets away from the center. So you have to rescue it with the forceps, either a micro forceps or another forceps, so that you complete the rhexis 360 degrees without any extension. Coming to the hydro dissection, it's better you avoid a single point hydro. It's better you do a swiping hydro movements in many places, so that there's no much fluid collected behind the nucleus. And the phaco parameter suggestions is, I think every surgeon has their own comfortable parameters. I feel they can use the same parameters, whichever they're comfortable with. Only thing is they can avoid surge in the anterior chamber. Better you can use a linear vacuum and then you can do a direct chop technique or a trench and chop technique, and then make the nucleus into many small bits so that when you try to eat the nucleus, there is no much fluctuations in the anterior chamber depth that happens. So make many small nuclear pieces and then start eating the pieces. And as you all know, there is no epinuclear cushion, so you have to always have a look whether there is any surge and PC is getting in touch with the probe also. And it's better you do a bimanual irrigation aspiration if the rhexis is small, which is more likely to happen, so that you do a complete thorough cleaning under the anterior lens surface, so that the polishing is much better if you do a bimanual IA. And it's better you use adjuvants like capsule hooks to be more safer, and be vigilant and alert to look for any complications that may happen. Maybe the rhexis may get extended. If at all, if it's a hard cataract and the rhexis gets extended, I would prefer doing an SICS if it's if it's very hard cataract. And for the cortex wash, it's the only thing is there may be small cortical bits of mature cataract under the iris. So it's better you spend some time removing out all cortical bits of the nucleus. So this video, it shows the difficulty in chopping when you don't have a proper epinuclear cushion to support. So you have to have a constant visualization of where the PC is. And bimanual irrigation aspiration is better. So you do a tangential cortical cleanup for these patients. Some people try to do a rhexis extension before the IOL placement, but I prefer doing double rhexis after I place the lens, because everything is safe for the patient, and the only thing that needs to be done is rhexis expansion, which can be done in a much safer way after you place the lens. So you ensure that the rhexis is just covering at the tip of the IOL optic. And it's always, if you have any doubts of a zonular weakness or the pupil intraoperate, if you expect a floppy iris to happen, it's better you use adjuvants like iris hooks, so that you have a very good visualization when you do phaco. And these capsule hooks can be transferred onto the iris hooks can be transferred onto the capsule also, so that the capsular bag remains much stable when you do phacoemulsification. So the take-home safety points for handling a white cataract is: decide the surgery technique by assessing the patient eye, and most importantly, your capacity. I think the surgeon's capacity is very important. And we have to consent for a guarded prognosis with the patient and the maybe attender also, and spend time in making a complete rhexis. So once your rhexis is complete, then you are like done most important step of the procedure. And always try to use adjuvants like a visco hook or a capsule hooks or a CTR also if needed. So when you do phaco, you aim for creating less stress on the capsule and zonules. Do a slow motion phaco. You avoid surge happening when you do phaco. And if at all you expect something is not going well, your nucleus tend to sink down, or your rhexis gets extended more. So it's better you convert to SICS for a better safe outcomes. And do a thorough cortical wash so that no nuclear bits are left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashok. A lot of good tips with the help of videos. And as you said, I agree. Not all the white lenses are the same, so you'll have to differentiate them. So one factor which is also useful is, of course, one, you can look at the color of the nucleus on slit lamp, whether it's absolutely white and milky or there are brown tinge. The other factor which is useful is also the patient's age. So someone who's less than 60, like in the 50s, 40s, you can almost always be sure it's going to be a soft cataract. Unless maybe if it's a myopic patient, then you may have a little brown tinge. But otherwise, they are the soft ones where phaco is possible. But like you said, the rhexis becomes a challenge. So using the right viscoelastic, using a high molecular weight visco to ensure you don't lose visco, and doing a rhexis with a forceps, following all these principles becomes very critical. So any additional points? Or?
I think just like black cataracts, even white cataracts also offer the share of problems. We have been a little bit of racist here, like black and white, but still I think this is very well put, Dr. Ashok. All the relevant points which are so important for a beginner as well as for a person who's doing regularly the cataracts. I think every point has been picked up and very well, put up as a list. Thank you very much for a very good, compilation.
Thank you, sir.
I think we'll move on to the next talk, Dr. Krishna Prasad from Hubli, Joshi, Hubli. So I think he needs no introduction. I think we know him not just as a wonderful surgeon, but also as a great teacher and educator. I think through his term with ARC, the South Zone, we have seen him a lot. And I think all the PG update programs, thankfully we also had one in Chennai. So we really realized how much of effort goes into making sure that the residents and fellows benefit widely with the help of all the faculty. So over to you, sir, for the next talk.
Thank you, Dr. Haripriya. I think thanks for the inclusion. When she asked me, I said, shall I be presenting another set of videos or some kind of a cataract video-based situation, or let it be a little offbeat? So I chose the offbeat thing, which is definitely way different from the kind of excellent surgeries and the video that you people have shown. I'm giving you my tips in the way we actually do the cataract surgery. Cataract surgery is not all about what happens in the operating room, but also a lot of things before and after. I think the counseling and the communication tips in cataract surgery applicable to every kind of practice that we have, be it a single practice, a corporate practice, or an NGO practice, or any kind of practice. I think these communication tips hold good. So I'll just try to compile all of them, and let me start. I think we do not have a curriculum as such for communication and counseling in our medical school. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. So we do not have an actual curriculum as such in even a residency training. So good communicators normally get into less trouble, whereas it's a forgotten soft skill. People who are born with good communication tend to do well, get into less of problems, and what we call as the foot in the mouth syndrome. They don't really get into their problems with it. So this is just a situation where a good counseling, communication, and trying to keep the patient in its in the loop actually adds a lot of value to your surgical outcome. You may do a great surgery, but I think you have to also communicate that you have done it. Let me just pick up a few things like a second eye syndrome. I call this is a very favorite of mine. When a patient comes for the first eye surgery, he is full of fear. So you do a great topical phaco, the surgery gets over in 5 minutes, the patient starts seeing everything, and patient is so impressed with you, he says you are God, and he asks for the second eye surgery. You are so happy with the patient's outcome, and the patient comes for the second eye and undergoes the second eye surgery. But after the second eye surgery, patient is not that happy. In fact, he has a lot of complaints. He says the second eye surgery took a little longer. He said the second eye surgery was more painful than the first. And he says that I could see everything after the first eye, but not after the second eye. Somehow something had gone wrong. So this is a very typical situation. And a patient who is complaining type gets a reason to actually complain more. This is probably because of the two evils in life. No, I always say comparing and expecting are the two evils of life, which bring in all the unhappiness that we have. If you stop comparing yourself to anyone else, if you stop expecting things from people around you, you'll be very happy. I think both the evils are working here. When the patient comes, he has no kind of set idea. He has no comparison. He just has only fear. Contrary to his fear, things happen very quickly, painlessly, very fast, and he starts seeing everything. So he's elated. Now for the second eye he comes with an expectation. When you come with any set of expectations, you are not happy with the outcome. At the same time, when he compares the first eye vision to the second eye, which has a cataract probably. And so he's very happy. Now he compares the second eye vision, which probably has some inflammation, corneal edema, to the first eye, which has been operated some time back. So obviously it's an unfair comparison, and he will always say, I could see very well with the first eye, but not with the second eye. So these are the things, this unfair comparison brings in always a bit of, a sore feeling, or a patient is a little bitter with the second eye procedure. I think when you handle this, I always tell, when I know that this is going to happen, I rather preempt it. I tell the patient that the second is going to take a little longer, maybe painful a bit, and probably you will see a little longer to see better. So this is all the more important when you do the monovision philosophy, especially the eye which we have focused for near. They always compare with the eye with the distant vision, dominant eye, and have problems. I think communicating and trying to preempt this second eye syndrome is very important. And it's about breaking the bad news. Let's say you have a big list of surgeries and you have the second case itself, there's a nucleus drop. So you have your, relatives waiting outside. When do you want to break the bad news and how you want to do it? Some people may think that you want to finish all the 10 cases and go back and sit with the relatives and try to give a proper explanation in detail. I think that is not the right way to do it. I think the best way, the best location to break the bad news or something going wrong in the intraoperative period is within the OT premises itself. I think why does that happen? Because our patients and relatives see a lot of Indian movies. A typical, what is an operating room in an Indian movie? So there's a closed door, there's a red light blinking, and people are moving in here and there, and the door opens. The surgeon comes out, sometimes without wearing a mask or without a cap, and he declares a judgment. That is the typical, cliche. That is the perception that we have about operating rooms. That means he declares a judgment like you can save the baby, or you can save the mother, or something like that. So there is some life-shattering judgment that happens. So people are psychologically prepared to hear the bad news soon after the surgery. So I think best is to you go to the semi-sterile area or call them there, and probably with a little distance, you try to explain, in our own way, which you can probably use, like if there's a PC rent or a drop, you say that the support is not good, we have to probably do another small procedure, and we may have to probably postpone putting a lens or whatever. So that is what is something that you need to actually do it. I think multifocal mania, I think whenever we choose a multifocal, I think there's always a communication glitch and we have problems. I always ask them to choose between two things. I simplify my counseling. I say, you choose between convenience versus clarity. I think that is something which is very important. That means if you want to have a crisp vision of a monofocal, you need to forego the convenience of probably a spectacle-free near vision. If you want the convenience of not wearing glasses, you need to forego a small percentage of clarity, maybe in terms of loss of contrast or photic phenomena. I think if you can put it across to your patient who can understand this, I think this makes it very clear. And many a times it is easy for the patient to rather choose, because finally they need to understand what is there going to be the post-operative vision and what they're going to compromise and what they're going to gain. So this is a very clear thing. And we always say in private practice, we don't sell the surgeon, we sell the IOL package. So I think we should probably stop talking more about IOLs. We talk about the technique, we talk about the surgeon. That is probably very important. And my last part is the most disastrous thing in cataract surgery, the very demoralizing for the surgeon, endophthalmitis. Most people are okay with managing the signs of endophthalmitis, but we fail in managing the art. I think many of the problems that we see around is because of the way we have managed the publicity part, the communication part, and the art of managing this particular dreaded thing. So it calls for both art and science. You need to accept it. There is nothing like TAS. You accept it's an endophthalmitis unless proved otherwise. Fall in line, and you should do a judicious and immediate and energetic action is very important. I think for the patient, it is really a bad thing to happen. He has pain, discomfort, and there's a breach of promise of good vision that you have done. And patients say that you are no good. It's very, very demoralizing in the beginning. You need to gather your wits and try to work on it. You have to take care of them immediately. The moment you know that your post-op patient has some doubtful endophthalmitis, take care of them. Don't make them wait. It can be pitted against you in the court of law. make it private. Okay, don't, I mean, the question in front of other patients, make it private. You should show concern, you should show compassion, but at the same time, you don't have to bend backward, show your panic, and that you don't have to really show that something as you have done a mistake. It's a well-known thing that endophthalmitis center. At the same time, take the hostility head on. This is very important. We are in India. It really, natural course is there always a hostility, but finally hold on to your nerves. And most times, with the kind of the science that we have at your disposal, you will be able to get good results and things will happen. What is very important is prevent a medical legal issue. You may win the case with a lot of effort, but still better to prevent it. And at the same time, hire a good advocate. What is very important is the law is the slave of evidence. Document everything. That is very important. That is what going to go, not just your good intention. So with this, I think this is the most important part of making a patient satisfied. Patient with 6/5 visions are sometimes dissatisfied. Patient with lesser vision are much happier. I think it's the whole gamut of all these things that go into a very successful cataract practice. I think that is my take on that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, sir. I think we all agree here that this is extremely critical. So that's also a skill learned, just like we learn the surgery. It's something which has to be taught and learned, observed, and see how we can do it the best possible way. Like you said, without bending backwards. How do we still be compassionate, be empathetic, and communicate with the patient? That would make both our life and the patient's life easier. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll go on to the next talk by Dr. Vivekanandan, who heads the cataract services at Aravind Eye Hospital, Pondicherry. Vivek, over to you.
Good afternoon, madam. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank Priya madam and AOS for giving me this opportunity. So today I'll be talking about IOL placement in case of a compromised posterior capsule. So as we know, posterior capsular rupture is the most common complication during cataract surgery, and the incidence, it varies from 0.2% to 14% from senior surgeons to residents and fellows. So first, I will be talking about PCR when it happens in manual small incision cataract surgery. So what are the options we have when the PCR is very large, when there is not enough support? It is always better to leave the patient aphakic and take the patient for a secondary procedure later on. If there is enough capsular support, then we can place a 3-piece rigid lens or a 3-piece acrylic lens in the sulcus, which is safer. Then we have the iris fixation. If the surgical duration is not much longer, you have 5 minutes, 10 minutes into surgery, you have a large PCR, you don't have enough support, then probably we can go for a iris fixation of the intraocular lens. But at the same time, if the surgical time is prolonged, it's been half an hour or so, or if there is a lot of positive pressure, it is always better to avoid placement of IOL in the first go. And then we have the iris claw lens. So we'll just see about. So, like I said, when do we leave the patient aphakic? Prolonged surgery, no backup IOL available, and not enough support. So coming to the first part. IOL placement in the sulcus. So this is a case where there was a large central PCR and the rhexis margin is very clearly visible. So gently the leading haptic is placed above the rhexis margin. In the trailing haptic, to place the trailing haptic, it is always better not to dial when we have such a large PCR. It's better to hold the haptic and force it inside and pronate so that you are making sure it does not go inside the capsular rent area. And one other thing is most often when we are having a PCR when the surgical time is higher or when it's a pseudo exfoliation patient with a PCR, there is one problem of having a small pupil. So whenever we have a small pupil when we're doing an extracapsular cataract or a manual small incision, so it doesn't matter because you're at the end of surgery, never hesitate to place iris hooks. No, in manual small incision cataract surgery and ECC, it's always better to use iris hooks rather than using pupil dilating devices like the Malyujan ring or the other devices, because the limitation of dilatation is just it's going to be only around 6 millimeters. Whereas with the iris hook, you're going to dilate it even more and you'll have better visibility while placing the intraocular lens. So why is this important? If you are going to do a blind procedure, if we are going to, it's a gamble, the chances of having the IOL drop is there. So this is the next one is the IOL sling technique by Dr. Manas Nath. So when we have a large PCR and we are trying to implant an IOL, there is always a chance that we can drop the intraocular lens into the vitreous cavity, like here. So what Dr. Manas Nath suggests to do is he always uses a 10-0 or 9-0 nylon, passes it through the optic, the dialing hole in the optic. He keeps it outside the eye. He gently places it. And when you have this anchoring by the suture, you can also dial the intraocular lens if you are comfortable dialing it. So once it is stable, you can just cut the suture and pull it out. You don't have to remove it totally. So this is a safe way, even if you drop the intraocular lens, you can always lift it back. So this is a safe tip from Dr. Manas. And then comes the iris claw lens. So the iris claw lens, so a little bit of wet lab practice and with the proper instruments like the iris claw holding forceps, it is easier to place this. The only problem is you should have a big library of lens. You should have all the powers of intraocular, all the powers of this. So in private practice, this is going to be a little difficult. But if you have a case which is problematic, when you think you might need to place an iris claw, it's always better to have one or get it ordered and keep it with you. So iris claw lens, the trick is proper centration. And the biggest disadvantage of this lens is once the enclavation happens, you cannot remove. If you try, so it has to be perfect the first time. There are no second times when you're operating, when you're trying to place an iris claw lens. So you have to exactly position the claws. Otherwise, if it is a little bit tilted, if you want to remove the enclavation, it is going to be this enclavation is going to become very difficult. When you try to pull, you're going to damage the iris, or you're going to even cause an iridodialysis because it's so firmly attached. So if at all you have to remove the iris claw, you might have to use a vitrectomy probe and cut the iris in that area. So you're going to cause a permanent hole in the iris. So this is one surgery which it is always better to practice properly a couple of times before even attempting. And the post-operatively, there are chances of having iritis and optic capture is a little bit higher in this technique. So it takes a little bit of time to really understand and do this. So this video I got. And then there is this single haptic fixation of intraocular lens. So when we have a large PCR, so this is a case where superiorly we have a nice capsular support, whereas inferiorly there was a large PCR and vitrectomy was done. And part of the capsule was also removed. After that, a 10-0 Prolene suture with a long needle is passed from the limbus through the iris and then externalized through the iris and the limbus on the opposite side. And gently the 10-0 Prolene suture is removed, is pulled out as a loop with the help of a Kublenz hook. And then it is looped around the haptic of the IOL. So here the leading haptic is gently placed in the sulcus. The trailing haptic is held and then the sutures are pulled on the opposite side so that it becomes taut around the haptic. So if you don't do this step, there are chances the suture loops will come out and there won't be proper centration. You can have IOL tilting post-operative. So it's very important. And once that is done, you internalize, you trim the suture outside bring it inside the anterior chamber, and through the common paracentesis made in between, you externalize both the sutures and tie the knot. So this is a very easy procedure compared to, it is a easy procedure and it can be done as a primary procedure. That is the biggest advantage of doing a single haptic. So when you have a large PCR, the centration is very good. But in double haptic fixation, with experience, it will be good. But there are chances of tilting. With single haptic, you are visibly seeing how the IOL is. So this is a little bit easier procedure. And then coming to phacoemulsification with the PCR. So the options are you place the intraocular lens in the sulcus, or you can place an intraocular lens with the reverse optic capture, pushing it within the bag, and then posterior capsular curvilinear rhexis and IOL in the back and IOL implantation. So first important thing is do not do a wound assisted IOL injection when you have so I use a 2.2 incision. So most of my IOL injection is wound assisted. So when you have a PCR, extend the wound. This is one major. You should not cause any pressure. You shouldn't force the eye or squeeze the eye because you have an exposed vitreous and all that. So make sure you extend to 2.8 or 3 millimeter. Make sure you are comfortable and gently inject. And then the other thing, the same like I said in SICS, always don't hesitate. Even at the end of surgery, make sure you use iris hooks, have a proper visualization. So iris hooks are actually very good when you have a PCR. You can you have a very large pupil. You can see where the cortex is, where the PCR is. You can visualize the vitreous very carefully also, and then gently you can inject the 3-piece intraocular foldable acrylic lens in the sulcus area and do an optic capture. So this is one tricky thing that a lot of beginners face, in injecting the 3-piece intraocular lens. Most of them come with a screw type injector. So while injecting, it's always important the screw rotates to clockwise direction. At the same time, you keep your cartridge onto the right side, and as you screw and the IOL is being injected, you have to go anti-clockwise with your cartridge. So otherwise, what will happen is the IOL will start somersaulting inside. It can cause rupturing the available support, and chances of IOL dropping is also very high. So it's very important to practice this before doing it. And the other thing is posterior capsular rhexis. When you have a small posterior capsular rent, it's always better to do a posterior capsular rhexis, and then you can place the intraocular lens in the back. And this is by Dr. Frederick. This video is by Dr. Frederick. And then there is
We can't hear you, Vivek. Are you there, Vivek? I think it's a network issue probably. I'm not sure. Vivek, are you here? Yeah, so I think as we wait for Vivek, any questions from the other panelists? So I think these are all unique scenarios. All of us have been through these situations and a lot of good tips on how to handle it. So the decision making is very important. of course, one tends to think of the lens placement in the very beginning, even before we manage the vitreous or take care of the nucleus. But ideal thing is to take care of the nucleus, the vitreous, the cortex, and then the IOL placement. So that order has to be maintained. But all the time, the goal is that you don't want to make the lens larger. So you can still have a sulcus placement or a capsular placement of the IOL also if there is adequate capsule support. So that approach is very useful.
Yes, madam. For the eyes which have a nucleus drop or a cortex drop, so what I heard from our retinal surgeons is if the nucleus is soft, it's better you place the lens and close the case. And if it's a very hard cataract, they say better you leave them aphakic so that they can
float it into the
PFC. They can float it and then they can remove it. So that's one other suggestion.
Especially if I think it's really black. Like I think otherwise today with most machines they're able to handle even the very hard ones. So yeah, I think we lost you in between, but excellent talk, a lot of good videos. Any other final questions for Dr. Vivek?
Haripriya, we have a lot of audiences joining actually for the next session probably.
Okay, so I'm just going to go to my talk. It's a short video. I'm just going to share one video. We have a couple of minutes more in this session. So this is the case with the more advanced subluxation. Is the video visible?
Yes, madam.
Okay. So as you can see, this is a wobbly lens and the lens is tilted backwards. So I'm just going to show you. So we saw Dr. Madhu show beautifully how to manage subluxation, but this is just to show a case with more gross subluxation. So the capsular rhexis is initiated from the site where the zonules are intact. Again, this can be a challenge at the area of dialysis. So forceps is useful, but if there is an issue, one can also use hooks when doing the rhexis for additional support. Once it is done, for anterior posterior support, I would like to use hooks. And here it's difficult because the lens again is tilted. So lifting with a spatula will also help to, to stabilize the lens, and then the hooks can be placed. So these hooks are basically iris hooks, but capsule hooks are great, but iris hooks, Green-Sharper's hooks also works well. I would place one hook for every 2 clock hours. I do the hydrodissection right after the hooks because that way I can have a clear visibility while the hooks are being placed. Here I have not placed a CTR because I plan to place a Sioni ring. So phacoemulsification has to be very gentle, very slow in these cases. So the same principles as you would follow in any case with subluxation. So you will want to ensure that there is no kind of chamber instability, no vitreous prolapse. So having the hooks gives stability to the lens from the anterior side, but equatorially there is no support, there's no CTR. So it's very important the bag doesn't collapse during phaco. We don't want to go and hold the bag or have further vitreous prolapse. So having the tip in the center, and you can still hold on to your normal settings, reduce your vacuum and flow a little, reduce your bottle height just a little based on your technique for us to handle the nucleus. So cortex wash is better when you don't place a CTR, but here because it is a more severe subluxation, the bag is weak and the capsule tends to come towards the aspiration port. So again, being very gentle. If the CTR is in place, then you would probably have a more tangential movement. But here, because it's a weak bag, I'm using visco intermittently to distend the bag before going back to aspirating cortex from the subsequent area. So you like to remove it very gently, and then the Sioni ring is pre-threaded with a double-armed Prolene suture. So insert the leading eyelet into the bag. The loop which holds the Prolene suture, this loop has to be facing convex, that it goes in comfortable through a 2.8 millimeter incision. Care is taken to also implant the trailing eyelet into the bag. So this is true again with all CTRs. You'd like to support it. So I always the manual technique. I like to support the trailing eyelid placement as well with a Sinskey to ensure it doesn't get missed into the sulcus. The loop is then dialed to the area where there is maximum subluxation, and the loop is brought up anteriorly above the anterior capsule. To fixate this suture to the sclera, I'm just making a pocket, a Hoffman's pocket, and the idea is to have the knot lie in the pocket. So The suture needles, which are now at the main tunnel, are reversed, and through a 26 gauge needle, I'm railroading. You dock the needle onto the 26 gauge needle and externalize each of these needles. The second one is also brought out in a similar fashion, about 1 millimeter away from the first point. So the 26 gauge needle basically goes through the Hoffman's pocket and then receives the needle from within the eye. The suture is then brought out from the tunnel, so and the two ends are cut and they are both tied together, all the time having an eye on the back to see if the rhexis and the capsular bag are centered adequately. We don't want to have it too tight as well. And then the ends are cut and the suture, the knot tends to slip back into the tunnel. Before placing the lens, I'd like to place the hooks back to support the anterior capsule. This way you can prevent further zonular loss. I also like to place a 3-piece IOL in these cases, because even with the Sioni ring or CTR, you still may have a chance of decentration or subluxation later on. So having the a 3-piece lens, you have an option of doing a scleral fixation or iris fixation later. So one would use pilocarping and then close the surgery. So I think we have another 2 minutes before we end this session. Any questions from anyone on any of the topics which we have covered so far?
I mean, in this kind of a very large dialysis, so surgeons who are not comfortable with Sioni, so how do you remove the lens and then plan for an iris fix IOL or something, or iris claw lens? So,
so one is to do, you can do an SICS technique, which is the most straightforward. If you want to remove the lens in toto, then you will have to do it. The only thing is we don't want any traction on the vitreous base. So we'll rather use 2 instruments, try to prolapse the lens into the anterior chamber and then remove it in toto and then do a vitrectomy and place a scleral fixated iris fixated IOL. Or one can also use the vitrectomy probe and cut it, but that the chance there of the lens matter following the vitreous is also very high. So that is one thing where one has to be careful. So that is an option which we might consider in patients with gross subluxation, like in children with Marfan syndrome. That's an option as well. So I saw a very, very nice technique in the CS Reshmi video session yesterday, where one surgeon used 2 MVR knives. The whole nucleus was brought into the AC, used 2 MVR knives on the nucleus on the 2 sides, created it. So when he's puncturing on both sides, it doesn't extend to the periphery. So he's doing it on the equator of the spherophakic lens. And through that port, he introduces an irrigation aspiration probe and then aspirates all the lens matter and then removes the capsular bag. It was done very elegantly. But end of the day, the goal is you don't want obviously to have lens matter follow the vitreous, no vitreous loss, and no traction on the vitreous base. So you want to minimize this. That's the principles you have to adopt based on the cataract grade and patient's age, etc.
Excellent video, ma'am. Ma'am, can we use CTS instead of Sionis, because Sionis putting is difficult?
No, absolutely, Anand. So that is a great option. So we would probably use a CTR. That also gives you advantage of having a CTR. So your phaco is more comfortable because your bag has the CTR support, and you can always put a CTS later. So when these are both options work great. So either a CTR with a CTS is equivalent to doing a Sioni. So whichever the surgeon wants to do. If you want to delay CTR placement and do a Sioni, it's fine. Or in midway, if you think the lens is tilting, I'd like a CTR. So don't think twice, put a CTR, complete the phaco INA, and then go in for your CTS.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, so I think we have come to the end of the session. So thank you very much, all the speakers. We had some excellent speakers today. I really appreciate sharing all your content. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, madam.
thank you.
Thank you, doctors, for the wonderful session, and thank you for attending the session on time.